Hi all. Our current lockdown has caused many believers to ask whether or not it is proper to resist government regulations that potentially infringe on religious liberty. As a case in point, we believe that worship is essential, but our church has also chosen to move our worship services online to comply with the City of Toronto's physical distancing regulations, even if streaming on YouTube cannot replicate the embodied nature of corporate worship. And we ensure that we maintain proper physical distancing between the 4 or 5 people participating in the service. So, why would we comply? Should we not obey God rather than men? The Apostle Peter, the same guy who said we should obey God rather than men, gives us good reason to submit to the government in 1 Peter chapter 2 verses 11 and 12 when he says, "Beloved, I urge you as sojourners and exiles to abstain from the passions of the flesh which wage war against your soul. Keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation." Peter recognizes that believers are strangers and exiles in the world. It's a reality he has affirmed from the beginning of his letter. We are sojourners in this world because Christ's redemptive work on our behalf has transformed us into God's children and transferred us from the kingdom of darkness to his kingdom of light. The world of which we once were a part is now hostile territory. So, as Christ's ambassadors to this hostile world, we need to guard against damaging the reputation of our faith by needless resistance. We cannot afford to be just another special interest group focusing on protecting and asserting its own rights and privileges. Moreover, we need to act wisely so that people around us would see that we are committed to seeking the welfare and flourishing of our city and neighborhood. Wise action requires more than knowing biblical truth. Wisdom requires the development of virtuous attitudes and godly dispositions. That's why Peter tells us to abstain from the passions of the flesh which wage war against your soul. We often misuse biblical truth because our desires are self centered. We need to develop the right desires. We must have our minds continuously renewed by Christ through His Word so that we would grow in love for Christ and thereby increasingly desire what pleases Him. In this particular situation, we follow the example of Jesus who gave up His rights so that He might do us good by saving us. In the same way, we give up our right to gather together in order to seek the welfare of our city by observing regulations designed to prevent the spread of coronavirus. In streaming our services, we sacrifice the benefit of embodied presence for the sake of the common good, while seeking to maintain our commitment to worship. This course of action is consistent with Peter's admonition to keep our conduct among the Gentiles honorable, so that they may see our good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation. Peter is consciously echoing Jesus' command in Matthew 5:16 to let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. We follow government regulations so that others may be led to glorify God. The current lockdown is an opportunity for us to show God's transforming work, weaning us away from our selfish desire to assert our rights. It's an opportunity for us to demonstrate self-giving love for the weak and vulnerable. And we could have an opportunity to give a reason for the hope we have when our neighbors see us being joyful and content even if we're facing the same restrictions and difficulties they face. We adorn the gospel and glorify God as we demonstrate the hope and security God has given us. The goal of having people glorify God through our good deeds is part and parcel of God's intent of saving us so that we may proclaim His excellencies. The transformation God is bringing about in our lives is a powerful witness to the greatness of God, for it is nothing short of a radical, albeit gradual transformation that He is bringing about in us. As our characters are progressively transformed, we begin to reflect the character of Christ more and more, and thereby point to the all-surpassing goodness and greatness of God. But lest we assume that the changes in our lives will automatically convince those around us of the greatness of our God, we must also be aware of the world's hostility to us and to our God. Peter tells us that the world would speak against us as evildoers. This was particularly true during those times when the Roman policy was keep your God happy for the good of society. Because Christians did not bow to any idols, they were thought of as atheists who were provoking the gods to anger by their unbelief, and therefore were putting not just themselves but their community at risk. Now, that is not quite the case today, but we still run the risk of being accused of evil doing because we live in a world that calls evil good and good evil. The continuing challenge is for us to lead exemplary lives that challenge people's mistaken opinions about Christianity. Our lives should be embodied, God glorifying arguments for the life giving beauty of the gospel. Bearing witness to God's glory in this fallen world will never be easy. That's why Peter tells us, keep our conduct honorable. We need to make God honoring behavior our continuous pursuit. Until when? Well, not just until this pandemic ends. Peter tells us we need to keep our conduct honorable until the day of visitation. In other words, we need to keep our conduct honorable until Christ returns in his glory. At that time, men will give him the glory he deserves. They will either glorify him because our witness has been part of God's means to bring them to faith in Christ, or men will glorify him because our witness leaves them no excuse for failing to submit to the lordship of Jesus. Either way, God will be glorified. So it is my prayer that in these difficult times, we would be faithful to the task of showing forth God's excellency as we grow in holiness, that God may be glorified in and through us.